Hello there everyone, welcome to Nightmare Narratives. I am your storyteller and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from and what time is it in your part of the world? Now, find your cozy spot and relax. The radio crackled to life at 6:47 a.m., pulling me from my morning coffee. Static filled the air, then a voice I didn't recognize. 3 hunters, 72 hours overdue. Truck found abandoned on Forest Road 12. Doors ripped clean off like paper. I set down my cup and grabbed the mic. This is Ranger Station 7. Can you repeat that? More static. Then, need experienced tracker. GPS shows last known position near Pine Ridge section. Pine Ridge, I knew that area well. Too well. Dense forest, steep ravines, easy to get lost if you didn't know what you were doing. In my 12 years as a forest ranger, I'd pulled 47 people out of situations just like this. Bears, broken legs, simple stupidity. I'd seen it all. My name is Marcus Hawthorne. I'm 38 years old. Been working these woods since I was 26. My wife used to joke that I knew every tree by name. She died 3 years ago in a car accident, and since then, the forest has been the only place that makes sense to me. I grabbed my gear, first aid kit, rope, flares, my .308 rifle, standard search and rescue equipment. The commendations on my office wall proved I was good at this job. Wilderness survival instructor, expert marksman, 47 successful rescues. I'd never lost a person on my watch. 20 minutes later, I was driving my truck down the winding forest road. October in Olympic National Forest is beautiful but dangerous. The leaves were turning gold and red, but early snow had already dusted the higher peaks. Temperature could drop 30 degrees without warning. I found their truck at mile marker 7. What I saw made my stomach twist. The Chevy pickup sat in the middle of the road like a broken toy. Both doors had been torn completely off. Not opened, not broken, but ripped away from the frame. The metal was peeled back like someone had opened a can of beans. I walked around the vehicle, looking for clues. No blood, no bodies, just the smell of fierce sweat still hanging in the air, mixed with something else. Something wild and musky, like a wet dog that had been rolling in dead fish. The footprints started 20 feet from the truck. I'm a tracker. I can tell you if a print was made by a size 10 hiking boot or a size 12 work boot. I can tell you if someone was running or walking, carrying weight or traveling light. These prints were like nothing I'd ever seen. 18 inches long, 5 toes, just like a human foot, but massive. The stride was 6 feet between steps. I did the math in my head. Whatever made these tracks weighed at least 800 pounds and stood over 8 feet tall. I radioed back to headquarters. This is Hawthorne. I'm going to need backup and a forensic team. Static answered me. Just static. I tried again. Nothing. The forest around me had gone completely quiet. No birds singing, no insects buzzing. Even the wind had stopped moving through the trees. The huge Douglas firs seemed to lean inward, like they were watching me. I followed the tracks deeper into the woods. The hunters' camp was 3 miles in, and it looked like a tornado had hit it. 2 tents were shredded into ribbons. A cooler had been thrown so hard it was wedged between 2 trees 30 feet off the ground. Sleeping bags hung from branches like torn flags. But what really got my attention were the stones from their campfire. Someone or something had arranged them in a perfect spiral pattern. Each rock was exactly the same distance from the next, forming a circle about 10 feet across. In the center sat a pile of bones, deer bones, picked clean. I knelt down to examine the nearest tree. 4 deep gashes ran down the trunk, each one 4 inches deep and 8 feet long. Whatever had made these marks was tall enough to reach that high and strong enough to tear through solid oak like it was soft cheese. The smell was stronger here, that musky, animal odor that made my brain scream danger. Every instinct I had was telling me to run, but 3 men were missing. I had a job to do. I found the first hunter a mile past the camp. He was alive, sitting against a tree with his eyes wide open, staring at nothing. When I called his name Jim Morrison, according to the missing persons report, he didn't even blink. "Jim, can you hear me?" His mouth moved, whispering the same words over and over. Eyes in the trees, They're always watching. Eyes in the trees. I checked him for injuries. No broken bones, no cuts or bruises. But his hair, which had been brown according to his driver's license photo, was now completely white. His pupils were so big, I could barely see the color of his eyes. "Jim, where are your friends? Where are Dave and Tommy?" "Eyes in the trees," he whispered. "They're always watching." I managed to get him on his feet and walking, but he moved like a robot. When we passed under low branches, he would duck and cover his head, whimpering. Every shadow made him shake. I was leading him back toward the truck when the tree fell. It was a huge pine, maybe 200 years old. It crashed down right across the forest road behind us with a sound like thunder. Fresh wood chips scattered everywhere, and I could see the cut marks on the trunk. Something had sliced through that massive tree in seconds. I tried the radio again. This time, instead of static, I heard voices, but they weren't speaking English. The sounds were almost human, but wrong somehow, like someone trying to imitate human speech without really understanding how it worked. The temperature started dropping. My breath began to fog, even though it was only 4 in the afternoon. Thick mist rolled between the trees, turning the familiar forest into an alien landscape. That's when I heard the knocking. Thump, thump, thump. It came from somewhere to my left. A few seconds later, an answer came from my right. Thump, 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 thump. Then another answer from behind me, and another from ahead. I was surrounded. Jim had stopped whispering, and was now just staring up at the trees, tears running down his face. "They're up there," he said, his voice barely audible. "They never left." I looked up, but saw only branches and mist. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was looking back at me, watching, waiting. The knocking got louder, and more complex, like drums having a conversation. Whatever was making those sounds was communicating, and I was the subject of their discussion. I found Dave Morrison's body in a clearing half a mile away. He'd been torn apart, but not randomly. His arms and legs were arranged in a specific pattern, all pointing northwest toward a cliff face covered in moss. When I scraped away the green growth, I found something that made my blood turn cold. Ancient carvings in the rock, stick figures, running from tall shapes with glowing eyes. At the bottom, symbols that looked like a warning, though I couldn't read them. Dave's body showed no signs of animal attack. The cuts were too clean, too precise. His internal organs were missing, but there was no blood pooled anywhere. This wasn't the work of a bear or mountain lion. This was something that thought, something that planned. As I knelt beside Dave's body, the feeling of being watched became overwhelming. Every shadow seemed to contain eyes. Every tree trunk looked like it might be hiding something massive and intelligent. The mist grew thicker, and somewhere in that grey wall of fog, I heard breathing that wasn't mine or Jim's. Deep, slow breaths from lungs much larger than human lungs. We weren't alone in these woods. We never had been. The blood trail started where Dave's body ended. Drops of red led away from the clearing, but they went in an impossible direction, straight up a vertical cliff face. I stared at the rock wall, looking for climbing equipment, marks or rope burns. There were none. Just blood drops leading up the stone like someone had walked up the cliff like it was flat ground. Jim was getting worse. He'd stopped talking completely and just followed me like a scared dog. Every time a branch moved or a twig snapped, he would drop to the ground and cover his head. I had to find Tommy, the third hunter. The blood trail was my only clue. I followed it around the cliff to where it met an old game trail. The path was barely visible, overgrown with ferns and moss, but someone had used it recently. The vegetation was trampled down by something much heavier than a human. After an hour of climbing, the trail opened into a hidden valley I'd never seen before, even though I thought I knew every inch of this forest. What I found there defied explanation. Massive logs had been stacked and woven together to form structures, 40 feet tall. They balanced perfectly without nails, rope, or any visible support. Trees had been bent and twisted into mathematical patterns that hurt my eyes to look at. It was like someone had turned the forest into a giant piece of art, but it wasn't human art. In the center of the valley stood something that made my hands shake. A dome made of interwoven branches, sealed with mud and moss. It was easily 20 feet across and perfectly round. Dark openings around the base looked like doorways. The smell here was overwhelming. That musky, ancient odor mixed with something else, something that smelled like copper and fear. As I approached the dome, the air pressure changed. My ears popped like I was in an airplane. The ground under my feet began to vibrate with heavy footsteps, but I couldn't see what was making them. Then I heard voices. They were deep and resonant, almost human but not quite. The rhythm was wrong, like someone speaking underwater, but I could tell they were having a conversation, and somehow I knew they were talking about me. A shadow moved between two trees on the far side of the valley. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall, with arms that hung down past its knees. When it turned its head, 2 eyes reflected the dim sunlight like mirrors. I grabbed Jim's arm and pulled him behind a fallen log. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard across the valley. More shadows moved between the trees. They were coordinating, flanking us like soldiers. These weren't wild animals acting on instinct. They were intelligent, organized, and they had a plan. The voices got closer. I could hear them breathing, deep, slow breaths from chests the size of barrels. Branches snapped under their weight as they moved through the forest. That's when I saw Tommy. He was hanging from a tree at the edge of the valley, but not by rope. Something had wedged him into a fork between 2 thick branches 30 feet off the ground. His body was positioned, so he was facing the dome, like he was being forced to watch something. The telepathic attack hit me like a freight train. Images flooded my mind, not my own thoughts, but someone else's memories forced into my consciousness. I saw the valley as it had been hundreds of years ago. Native American burial grounds with carved cedar posts marking sacred graves. I saw Tommy and his friends arriving 3 days ago, laughing and joking as they set up camp right on top of the burial site. I watched through alien eyes as they used sacred cedar posts for firewood, as Tommy urinated on a grave marker while his friends laughed as they scattered ancient bones to clear a space for their tent. The rage that filled my mind wasn't my own. It was ancient, cold, and absolutely certain of its right to punish. Then I understood. The creatures in these woods weren't just animals. They were guardians, protectors of sacred places that humans had forgotten or chosen to ignore. We had crossed a line, and now they were teaching us what happened to those who showed no respect. A massive figure stepped out from behind the dome. It was at least 9 feet tall, covered in dark hair, with shoulders broader than any human could possess. Its eyes glowed with an intelligence older than civilization. When it looked at me, I felt like I was being judged by something that had watched over these woods since before my ancestors crossed the ocean. But in that judgment, I sensed something I didn't expect. Mercy. It spoke to me without words, directly into my mind. I wasn't like Tommy and his friends. I worked in the forest. I respected it. I could be allowed to leave, but there were conditions. I had to leave an offering. I had to promise never to return to this valley, and I had to never tell anyone the complete truth about what happened here. With shaking hands, I pulled out my tobacco pouch, a habit I'd picked up from an old Native American ranger who'd trained me years ago. I placed it on the ground along with my ranger badge, the symbol of my authority in these woods. The creature nodded once, and the path out of the valley appeared. Trees that had been impassable suddenly parted. The mist lifted. Jim stood up on his own for the first time in hours and began walking toward the opening. As we left the valley, I felt eyes on my back until we reached the main trail. When I turned around one last time, the forest looked normal again, but I knew they were still there, watching, waiting to see if I would keep my promise. The walk back to civilization felt like crossing between 2 different worlds. Jim walked beside me in silence, but he was walking. His color was coming back, and he'd stopped jumping at every sound. Whatever hold they'd had on his mind was loosening. As we got farther from the sacred valley, at the truck, what was left of it, I found my radio working again. I called in a careful report. 3 hunters, bear attack. 1 survivor in shock. 1 deceased. 1 missing, presumed dead. Recommend immediate area closure. The response team arrived 2 hours later. Jim was taken to the hospital, where doctors found him physically healthy but suffering from severe psychological trauma. He never spoke about what happened in the woods. 6 months later, he moved to Seattle and got a job in an office building. He never went camping again. I filed my official report that same night. Hunters violated posted warnings about food, storage in active bear habitat. Physical evidence suggests large black bear, possibly injured, attacked camp during night. Victim David Morrison showed signs of bear mauling. 3rd victim Thomas Chen presumed taken by same animal. Survivor James Morrison found in state of shock, unable to provide coherent account. Recommend closure of Pine Ridge section during salmon run season to prevent similar incidents. The lies came easily. They had to. The truth would have gotten me committed to a mental hospital or transferred to a desk job in the city. But more importantly, I'd made a promise to something ancient and powerful, and I intended to keep it. That night, I couldn't sleep in my cabin. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing eyes in the darkness. I ended up sleeping in my truck in the parking lot of the 24-hour diner in town. The next morning, I put in for a transfer to the desert station in eastern Washington. I told my supervisor I needed a change of scenery after my wife's death. He approved it without question. But even in the desert, I couldn't escape what I'd learned in those woods. I started carrying tobacco everywhere I went. Not to smoke. I'd never been a smoker, but as an offering. Whenever I entered any wilderness area, I would leave a small pinch on the ground and whisper a request for permission to pass through. Other rangers started noticing things about me. I had an uncanny ability to predict where we'd find problem wildlife. I could sense when a hiking trail was going to be dangerous, even when there was no obvious reason. My success rate for avoiding dangerous encounters became legendary in the service. What I couldn't tell them was that I'd developed a sixth sense for the presence of things that didn't want to be found. The desert had its own guardians, its own sacred places. They were different from the forest watchers, but they were there. 3 months after Pine Ridge, I got a call from Jim Morrison. He'd tracked down my new number somehow. "I remember," he said without introduction. "Not everything, but enough. They're not just in Washington, are they?" "No," I said. "They're everywhere. We just don't usually see them." "What are we supposed to do with that knowledge?" I thought about the ancient eyes in the forest, the intelligence behind them, the compact I'd made. We respect the places they protect. We remember that we're guests in their world, not owners of it. Jim was quiet for a long time. Then, "Do you think they'll leave us alone now, as long as we honor the agreement, as long as we remember?" I never heard from Jim again, but I kept track of him through mutual contacts. He stayed in the city, never went hiking or camping, but he started donating money to wilderness conservation groups. He understood, in his own way, what we owed to the watchers in the woods. 6 months later, Pine Ridge was quietly removed from all official trail maps. When I called my old supervisor to ask about it, he said there had been too many accidents in that area. Hikers getting lost, equipment malfunctions, strange animal encounters. It was easier to just steer people away. I wasn't surprised. The Guardians were still doing their job. 28 years have passed since Pine Ridge. I'm 66 now, officially retired, but the Forest Service still calls me sometimes for consultations on unusual wildlife encounters. What they don't know is that I've become part of an unofficial network. There are others like me, park rangers, Forest Service workers, tribal elders, who know the truth about what lives in the wild places. We don't talk about it openly, but we share information when we need to. A ranger in Montana calls when he finds impossible footprints near Glacier National Park. A wildlife biologist in Northern California sends me photos of tree structures that shouldn't exist. We don't use official channels for these conversations. We don't file reports. We just make sure the sacred places stay protected. I trained a dozen younger rangers before I retired, though I never told them the whole truth. I taught them wilderness, respect protocols, how to read the signs when you're not welcome somewhere, how to leave proper offerings, how to recognize when wildlife is trying to communicate rather than just react. The ones who listened never had cryptid encounters. The ones who didn't, well, some of them transferred to city jobs after their first year. Last month, I got a call from a young ranger in Oregon. She'd found a campsite that had been destroyed in a way that didn't match any known animal behavior. Tents arranged in patterns, equipment placed in trees, spiral arrangements of stones around a dead fire. What am I supposed to put in my report? She asked. Bear attack, I told her. Recommend area closure during berry season. She was quiet for a moment. Then, there's more to this, isn't there? There's always more. The question is whether you're ready to learn it. She was, I could tell. So I taught her what I learned at Pine Ridge, how to leave tobacco offerings, how to recognize the signs of a sacred place, how to walk through the woods like a guest instead of a conqueror. Most importantly, I taught her how to know when she was being watched by something that remembered the world before highways and shopping malls. The watchers are still out there, in every national forest, every wilderness area, every place where the wild things still have room to exist. They're not hiding from us. We exist in their world by permission. Sometimes I wonder, what would happen if that permission was revoked? If the Guardians decided that humans had finally gone too far, taken too much, forgotten to completely who was here first? I hope I never find out, but I keep the tobacco pouch in my pocket, just in case. And every night before I sleep, I whisper a prayer of gratitude to the watchers of Pine Ridge, who could have killed me but chose to teach me instead. They're still watching. They're always watching. And maybe that's the way it should be. Marcus Hawthorne died peacefully in his sleep on October 15, 2018. His personal effects included 47 commendations for successful rescues, a collection of tobacco pouches from various tribes, and a journal with this story as the final entry. The Pine Ridge section of Olympic National Forest remains closed to this day, officially due to unstable geological conditions. My name is Thomas Redwood, and I've been a park ranger in the Superior National Forest for 15 years. Before that, I spent 18 months in the jungles of Vietnam, earning a Bronze Star and seeing things that broke stronger men than me. I came to Minnesota looking for peace in the wilderness, thinking I'd left all the monsters behind in the war. I was wrong. It started on a Tuesday morning in September 1971. The radio crackled to life while I was checking equipment in my cabin near Basswood Lake. Thomas, we need you at campsite 12. Emergency call came in an hour ago. The dispatcher's voice was tight, professional, but I could hear something underneath it. Fear, maybe. What's the situation? I asked, already reaching for my jacket. Family of 4 went camping 3 days ago. Father's missing. Wife and kids were found this morning by another camper. They're saying some strange things. What kind of strange things? A pause. They're talking about wolfmen walking upright, taking their father to an island. I sighed. Shock and trauma could make people see all sorts of things, any sign of bear activity. That's what we thought. But Thomas, you need to see this scene for yourself. The drive to Basswood Lake took 20 minutes through thick pine forest. Fall was coming early this year, and the leaves were already turning orange and red. The air smelled like dying things, which should have been my first warning. I'd handled missing persons cases before. Hunters who got lost, fishermen who fell through ice, kids who wandered off from camp. The wilderness was dangerous enough without adding monsters to the mix. But Vietnam had taught me to trust my instincts, and something felt wrong the moment I pulled up to the campsite. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds, no squirrels, not even insects. Just dead quiet, like the forest was holding its breath. The second thing was the smell. Not just the usual pine and lake water, but something else. Something wild and old and angry. The family's campsite looked like a tornado had hit it. Their tent was shredded, not torn, but carefully cut into strips. The picnic table was flipped over, canned food scattered everywhere. 2 canoes lay in pieces on the shore, aluminum bent and twisted in ways that would take incredible strength, but it was too organized, too purposeful. Bears destroyed things randomly, looking for food. This was different. This was planned. The mother sat in the back of an ambulance, holding her 2 kids, a boy about 10 and a girl maybe 8. All 3 were wrapped in blankets, staring at nothing. The kind of stare I'd seen on soldiers' faces after their first firefight. Mrs. Coleman, I approached slowly, keeping my voice gentle. I'm Ranger Redwood. Can you tell me what happened? She looked at me with hollow eyes. You won't believe us. Nobody believes us. Try me. The little girl spoke up, her voice barely a whisper. Daddy went to get water from the lake. We heard him yelling, but not like he was hurt, like he was surprised. Then we heard ... howling, but not like regular dogs. What did you see? I asked. Big dogs, she said, but they walked like people. They had hands. They surrounded Daddy and took him to the island. She pointed across the water to a small wooded island about 400 yards away. The boy nodded. There were lots of them, maybe 12. They moved like soldiers, all together. The biggest one looked right at us, and I swear it smiled. I'd heard trauma stories before, but something about the way these kids spoke made my skin crawl. They weren't hysterical or confused. They were describing exactly what they'd seen, like they were giving a military report. How long ago was this? I asked. 2 nights ago, the mother said. We hid in the boat, turned upside down on the shore. didn't move until morning. We could hear them on the island all night, howling and ... and laughing. I looked across the water at the island. It was thick with trees, plenty of places to hide. Did you hear your husband at all after they took him? She shook her head, tears starting to fall. No, nothing. The paramedic caught my eye and nodded toward the trees. We walked a few steps away from the family. Strangest thing I've ever seen, he said quietly. No wounds on any of them, but they're in complete shock. Been like this since we got here. And the tracks. What about the tracks? You need to see them yourself. There by the water. I walked down to the shoreline, and that's when I knew this wasn't going to be a normal missing person case. The tracks were huge, bigger than any wolf I'd ever seen. The paw prints were at least 6 inches long, but they were mixed with something else. Handprints, human-sized handprints, right next to the paw prints, like whatever made them could walk on both 4 legs and 2. The trail led into the water, heading straight for the island. I'd tracked Viet Cong through jungle that would eat a man alive, but I'd never seen anything like this. The spacing between the prints suggested creatures that were comfortable running on 4 legs or walking upright. The depth told me they were heavy, maybe 300 pounds each, and there were a lot of them, at least 12 sets of tracks, just like the boy had said. I radioed for backup and a boat, then spent the next hour photographing everything. The destroyed campsite, the tracks, the direction they led. Whatever had happened here, I needed evidence. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the island. Every time I looked up, I expected to see shapes moving in the trees, but there was nothing. Just that awful silence and the smell of something wild and dangerous. The sun was starting to set when the boat arrived. I was going to that island, and I was going to find out what happened to David Coleman. I just hoped I'd live to tell about it. The boat cut through the dark water like a knife. Officer Mike Jensen from the County Sheriff's Department sat beside me, checking his rifle for the 3rd time. He was young, maybe 25, and trying hard not to look scared. "You really think it's wolves?" he asked. "Wolves don't arrange campsites like that," I said, "and they don't work in packs of 12. Then what do you think it is?" I didn't answer because I didn't know, but my gut was telling me we were heading into something bad. The island was maybe 2 acres, covered in thick pine and birch trees. As we got closer, I could see a small beach on the north side where we could land. The tracks led right to it. "Jesus," Mike whispered as we pulled the boat onto the shore. "What is that smell?" It was stronger here, wild and musky, like a zoo's predator house, but underneath it was something else, something that made my Vietnam instincts kick in hard. The smell of death. We followed the tracks into the trees, our flashlights cutting through the growing darkness. The trail was easy to follow, broken branches, disturbed earth, and that awful smell getting stronger with every step. We found David Coleman in a clearing at the center of the island. He was dead, but not the way you'd expect from a wolf attack. He was lying on his back, arms crossed over his chest, surrounded by animal bones arranged in a perfect circle. His throat had been torn open, but there was very little blood on the ground. "This is ritual," I said, kneeling beside the body. "Look at the positioning, look at the bones." Mike was backing away, his face pale in the flashlight beam. "We need to call this in, we need more people." But I was studying the scene, my mind racing. The bones weren't random, they were wolf bones, old ones, arranged in specific patterns. David's body was positioned to face something, and when I followed his gaze, I saw it. A mound of earth, about 10 feet across, covered in carved stones. Some of the stones had been moved, showing dark soil underneath. Fresh digging. "Mike, bring your light over here." He joined me reluctantly as I examined the mound. The carved stones showed symbols I didn't recognize, but they were old, really old, and someone had been digging here recently. "It's a burial site," I said. "Native American, probably, and someone's been disturbing it." "You think David was grave robbing?" "No, but I think someone was, and whatever's protecting this place didn't like it." That's when we heard the howling. It started low, almost like singing, coming from the trees around us. But it wasn't like any wolf howl I'd ever heard. It was too organized, too purposeful, like voices having a conversation. Mike raised his rifle, spinning in circles as the sound surrounded us. "Where are they?" "Everywhere," I whispered. The howling stopped suddenly, leaving us in dead silence. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. Laughter, human laughter, but with something wrong about it. Too deep, too rough. We need to go, I said. Now. We started back toward the boat, moving fast, but trying not to run. Running would make us pray. In the darkness around us, I could hear movement, branches breaking, leaves rustling. They were pacing us, staying just out of sight. The boat, Mike gasped as we reached the beach. It was 20 feet offshore, drifting away. The rope had been cut, not chewed, cut with something sharp. Can you swim to it? I asked. Before he could answer, they came out of the trees. I've seen a lot of things in my life, but nothing prepared me for this. They looked like wolves, but they were huge, 7 feet tall when they stood on their hind legs. Their front paws were too much like hands, with fingers that could grip and tear. Their eyes reflected our flashlight beams, but there was intelligence there. Too much intelligence. There were 12 of them, just like the kids had said. They formed a semicircle around us, cutting off any escape route except the water. The largest one stepped forward, and when it opened its mouth, words came out. Rough, growling words, but English. You disturb sacred ground. Mike's rifle went off, the shot echoing across the water. The bullet hit the creature in the chest, and it staggered back, but it didn't fall. It looked down at the wound, then back at us, and smiled with too many teeth. Silver, it said. Need silver. Then they were moving. I tackled Mike into the water as the pack rushed forward. The lake was cold enough to stop your heart, but it was better than what those things would do to us. We swam hard for the boat, expecting to feel claws and teeth at any second, but they didn't follow us into the water. They stood on the shore, watching us with those terrible, intelligent eyes. The big one called out across the water, "Tell them to leave the dead alone. Tell them the Brotherhood watches." We made it to the boat and started the engine with shaking hands. As we pulled away from the island, I could see them still standing there, silhouettes against the trees. What the hell were those things? Mike asked, his voice shaking. I thought about the burial mound, the disturbed graves, the way the creatures had spoken English. Guardians, I said. Someone's been robbing graves, and they're protecting their dead. But what are they? I looked back at the island, where shapes were moving in the darkness. I don't know, but I don't think this is over. 3 days later, another family went missing at Moose Lake, 15 miles north. Same pattern, father taken. Family traumatized. Talks of dogmen walking upright. And I realized that whatever was happening, it was just getting started. The second attack changed everything. The family at Moose Lake had been experienced campers, the kind who knew how to handle themselves in the wilderness. But when we found them huddled in their overturned canoe, they looked just like the Colemans. Broken, terrified, changed. Same story, Sheriff Morrison said as we stood by their campsite. He was a big man, tough as nails, but even he looked shaken. Father taken in the night. Family says it was dogmen, walking upright, coordinated like soldiers. The teenage son, Bobby, was calmer than the others, old enough to remember details, young enough to say what he saw without worrying if people would believe him. There were 12 of them, he told me, maybe 13, big as bears, but they moved like people. The leader wore something around his neck, looked like metal, but old, really old. What did they do with your father? Took him to the island. We could hear him calling for help at first, then it got quiet, but they kept howling all night, like they were talking to each other. I looked across Moose Lake to the small island in the center. Different lake, different island, but I was willing to bet we'd find the same thing there. A burial mound, disturbed graves, and another body arranged like a sacrifice. I want to check that island, I told Morrison, after what happened at Basswood. Not alone, you don't. He was right. Mike Jensen hadn't been the same since our encounter. He'd taken leave, said he needed time to think. I didn't blame him, but I couldn't stop thinking about what the creature had said. Tell them to leave the dead alone. Someone was grave robbing, and these things were making campers pay the price. That afternoon, I drove to the Ojibwe reservation to talk to Joseph Crowfeather, an elder who knew more about local history than anyone alive. His cabin sat on the shore of Birch Lake, surrounded by totems and medicine wheels that had been in his family for generations. "Thomas," he said as I walked up to his porch, "I've been expecting you. You know why I'm here. The spirits are angry, very angry. Someone has been disturbing the old burial grounds, taking things that should not be taken." I sat down beside him on the porch steps. "Tell me about the burial grounds." Joseph was quiet for a long time, looking out over the water. When he finally spoke, his voice was sad. "Long ago, There were warriors who protected these lands. Wolf warriors. We called them. They could take the form of wolves when they needed to hunt or fight. When they died defending their village from white settlers, they were buried with their wolf totems in sacred places throughout the forest. And now someone's digging up their graves. 3 weeks ago, artifacts started showing up in Minneapolis. Native American items, very old, very valuable. Copper collars, carved bones, wolf totems, items that should never leave the burial grounds. What happens when they're removed? Joseph looked at me with ancient eyes. The wolf warriors wake up. They can't rest while their sacred items are scattered. They hunt until everything is returned. But they're killing innocent people. They see all white men as enemies. To them, you are all the same as the ones who stole their graves. That night, I went back to Moose Lake with a full team. 6 deputies, emergency medical, and enough firepower to stop a small army. We were taking no chances. The island was eerily quiet as we approached. No birds, no insects, just that awful silence that seemed to follow these creatures. We found the father's body in the same ritual positions, surrounded by bones, facing a disturbed burial mound. But this time, we weren't alone. They came out of the darkness like shadows, surrounding us before we knew they were there. 12 massive forms, moving with military precision. The leader stepped forward, and in the moonlight, I could see the copper collar around his neck. "You return," he said in that rough, growling voice. "Good. You will witness justice. We're not your enemies," I called out. "We want to help. Help." The creature tilted its massive head. "Your people steal from our dead, scatter our sacred items like trash. You help by staying away. Someone else is doing the stealing. We want to stop them too." The leader studied me for a long moment. "You are the one who tracks. You know the forest. I know it. Then you know there are more burial grounds. 3 have been disturbed. The thieves will come again." Before I could respond, howling erupted from across the forest. Not the organized howls we'd heard before, but wild, angry sounds. The pack around us answered, their voices joining in a conversation that sounded like the song of war. "They have found another site," the leader said. "Pine Island. The thieves work tonight. Let us stop them," I said. "Let us help." The creature stared at me with eyes that held too much intelligence, too much pain. "If you fail, more innocents will die. Their blood will be on your hands. And if we succeed, then perhaps the Brotherhood can rest." Pine Island was 10 miles south, accessible only by canoe. By the time we got there, we could see lights moving through the trees' flashlights. Probably 3 or 4 people digging by night. We caught them red-handed. 2 men from Minneapolis, with shovels and metal detectors, their van loaded with stolen artifacts. Native American burial goods worth thousands of dollars on the black market. But as we arrested them, I heard something. In the forest around us, movement, breathing. The pack was there, watching from the darkness. "You did well." The leader's voice came from the trees, "but the damage is done. Sacred items are scattered. The dead cannot rest until all are returned." "We'll find them," I called out. "We'll bring everything back. You have 3 days. After that, we hunt again, and this time, we will not stop until every white man leaves our territory." The howling started again, but this time it was moving away, fading into the forest. They were giving us a chance, but not much of one. 3 days to track down stolen artifacts across 2 states. 3 days to prevent a supernatural war. 3 days to learn if the dead could ever really rest. Finding the stolen artifacts should have been impossible. 2 men had been selling Native American burial goods for over a month, scattered across collectors and museums from Minneapolis to Chicago. But I had help I never expected. Joseph Crowfeather made some calls to tribal councils across the Great Lakes region. Within hours, we had a network of people tracking down every item. The wolf totems, the copper collars, the carved bones, everything had to come back. The first day, we recovered about half the items from honest collectors who didn't know they were buying stolen goods. The second day, we raided a private museum in Minneapolis and found most of the rest. But we were still missing the most important piece, the copper collar of the war chief, the one the pack leader wore. It had been sold to a private collector in Chicago, and he wasn't cooperating. "Time is running out," Joseph told me on the morning of the 3rd day. "The spirits grow restless. If we don't return everything, ... double quotes." He didn't need to finish. We both knew what would happen. That afternoon, I got a call. That made my blood run cold. Another family had been attacked at Timber Bay, just 20 miles from town. This time, the entire family was missing, not just the father. I raced to the scene with every deputy I could find. The campsite was destroyed, but there was no blood, no bodies, just tracks leading into the forest, and howling. Constant howling from the deep woods, like the pack was calling to something. They're gathering, I realized. All the packs. This isn't just 12 creatures, anymore. The howling was coming from at least 40 different voices, maybe more. Wolf warriors from burial grounds across the region, all converging on our area. The Brotherhood was preparing for war. I radioed in for the state police, the National Guard, anyone who would listen. But how do you explain that an army of supernatural wolfmen is about to descend on your county? That evening, I went to Basswood Lake alone. It was stupid, maybe suicidal, but I had to try one more time to reach them. The missing family was still alive somewhere, and I was running out of options. They were waiting for me on the shore, not just the original pack, but dozens of them. Massive shapes in the moonlight, all watching me with glowing eyes. The leader stepped forward, and I could see the ancient copper collar gleaming round his neck. "You have failed," he said. "The sacred items remain scattered. The dead cannot rest." "We found almost everything," I said. "Just one piece left your collar. The collector in Chicago won't give it up. Then he will die, and his family, and everyone in his city. There has to be another way." The creature studied me for a long moment. "You are not like the others. You show respect for the dead. You work to return what was stolen. I'm trying to prevent a war. There is another path, but it requires sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" The leader gestured to the pack around us. "Join the Brotherhood. Become our guardian in the world of the living. Help us protect the sacred sites forever." I stared at him. "You want me to become like you, not like us. With us. Keep your human form, but carry our mark, our bond. You will know when burial grounds are threatened. You will stop the thieves before they can act. And if I refuse..." The howling rose from the forest around us, 40 voices singing of war and death. "Then we hunt until every white man is gone from our territory, starting with the family we hold." I thought about the missing family, about all the innocent people who would die if this escalated, about the responsibility I'd carried since Vietnam to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. What do I have to do? The ceremony took place at the original burial ground on the first island. The pack gathered in a circle around the disturbed graves, their voices raised in an ancient song that seemed to make the earth itself tremble. The leader approached me with something in his massive hands, a wolf-tooth pendant, carved with symbols that seemed to move in the moonlight. "This binds you to the Brotherhood," he said. "You will feel when the sacred places are threatened. You will know when thieves come to steal from the dead, and you will stop them." He placed the pendant around my neck, and the world exploded into sensation. I could feel every burial ground in the forest, could sense the spirits of the ancient warriors, could hear the heartbeat of the earth itself. But I was still human, still Thomas Redwood, park ranger and protector of the wilderness. "The family," I gasped. "Released. They will remember nothing of this night, and the collar in Chicago will be returned. The collector will have dreams, bad dreams, until he brings it back." The leader stepped back, and I could see something different in his eyes. Not the rage and pain from before, but something like peace. "The Brotherhood has a guardian again," he said. "The first in 100 years. The dead may rest." One by one, the pack began to fade, like shadows dissolving in the dawn. But I could still feel them, could sense their presence in the forest. Watching, waiting, protecting. The howling stopped, replaced by the normal sounds of night owls calling, wind in the trees, the gentle lap of water against the shore. The war was over before it began. That was 30 years ago. I'm retired now, but I still wear the wolf-tooth pendant, and I still feel the ancient warriors watching over the forest. The collector in Chicago returned the copper collar within a week, claiming he couldn't sleep until he got it out of his house. We buried it with the rest of the artifacts, and the spirits finally found peace. The missing family was found wandering near the highway, confused but unharmed. They remembered camping, but nothing about the attack. The official report blamed their condition on exposure and dehydration. Sometimes it's better to let people forget. I trained my replacement, Sarah Running Bear, a young Ojibwe woman who understands the old ways. I gave her the pendant on my last day, and watched her eyes widen as she felt the connection for the first time. "They're still out there," she whispered. Always, I said, but now they're guardians, not hunters. They'll only come if the dead are threatened again. The burial grounds are protected now, officially designated as cultural sites, but the real protection comes from the Brotherhood, and from rangers who understand that some things are more important than law or logic. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I still hear them howling, not in anger, but in song. The eternal song of guardians, watching over sacred ground, making sure the dead can rest in peace. And in the morning, I check the reports from across the region. No more artifact thefts, no more disturbed burial grounds, no more families disappearing in the night. The pact holds, the Brotherhood watches, and the forest keeps its ancient secrets safe. But every ranger who works these woods knows the truth, even if they never speak it aloud. There are guardians in the darkness, protectors older than memory, watching over places that must never be disturbed. And sometimes, if you listen carefully on a moonless night, you can hear them singing the songs of the dead, keeping the old promises, maintaining the balance between the world of the living and the realm of spirits. The howling Brotherhood keeps its eternal vigil, and the dead sleep peacefully under the watchful eyes of their guardians, as it should be, as it must be, as it will always be. My name is Elena Vasquez, and I need you to believe what I'm about to tell you. I know how it sounds, trust me. I've spent 30 years trying to convince myself it didn't happen. But the scars on my hands don't lie, and neither do the nightmares that still wake me up screaming. Back in 1985, I was a park ranger at Death Valley National Monument. Not your typical ranger though. I had a PhD in geology and had spent years studying desert cave systems. I'd published papers on mineral formations and discovered 3 new crystal structures in the Mojave. I was the kind of person who believed in facts, evidence, and scientific explanation for everything. The desert was my home. I knew every canyon, every hidden spring, every cave entrance in 100 square miles. When other rangers got lost, they called me. When geologists needed guides, they asked for Elena. I could navigate by star positions, read weather patterns in cloud formations, and find water where others saw only endless sand and rock. That's why they sent me when the distress beacon went off. It was July 15th, and the temperature had hit 127 degrees that day. Even for Death Valley, that was brutal. The emergency call came through our radio system around sunset. Rock climbing, Team Devil's Canyon. 4 climbers overdue 36 hours. Gear found scattered. Please send immediate assistance. Devil's Canyon was a place I knew well, or thought I did. It was a deep crack in the earth, about 20 miles from the visitor center, popular with experienced climbers because of its challenging rock faces. The canyon walls rose nearly 400 feet straight up, with narrow ledges and hidden alcoves that made for exciting but dangerous climbing. I grabbed my emergency pack and headed out in the Park Service truck as the sun was setting. The drive took 40 minutes over rough desert roads, and by the time I reached the canyon rim, the stars were coming out. I could smell something wrong. Before I even got out of the truck, it was sulfur, sharp and bitter, like rotten eggs mixed with burned matches. There shouldn't have been any sulfur smell in that area, no volcanic activity, no hot springs, nothing that would produce that odor, but it hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I set up my camp on the canyon rim and waited for first light. Desert rescues at night were suicide missions, even for someone with my experience. But as I lay in my sleeping bag, staring up at the stars, I kept smelling that sulfur smell getting stronger. When dawn broke, I rappelled down into the canyon to look for the missing climbers. What I found at the bottom made my stomach turn. Their gear was everywhere: ropes, carabiners, helmets, backpacks scattered across the canyon floor like a tornado had hit them. But it wasn't random destruction. The ropes had been cut clean through, not frayed or worn. The metal climbing hardware was twisted and bent in ways that should have been impossible. I picked up one of the carabiners, a steel clip designed to hold thousands of pounds of weight. It was twisted like a pretzel. The metal warped as if it had been heated and shaped by giant hands. The forces needed to do that kind of damage. No animal in North America was strong enough, and there were no tracks, no human footprints leading away from the scene. No animal prints either, just scattered gear and that sulfur smell getting stronger as the sun climbed higher. I spent the morning searching the canyon floor, calling out for survivors, but found nothing. As a geologist, I was trained to observe and document everything. As a ranger, I was trained to find missing people, but nothing in my training had prepared me for what I discovered next. Hidden behind a rockfall on the north wall of the canyon was a cave entrance I'd never seen before. It was narrow, maybe 4 feet wide, and partially blocked by fallen stones. The sulfur smell was coming from inside, along with something else, a heat that made the air shimmer even in the cave's shadow. I checked my equipment: headlamp, spare batteries, rope, first aid kit, emergency radio, everything a professional cave rescue required. I called in my position to base camp and entered the cave. The temperature inside was at least 15 degrees, hotter than outside, which made no geological sense. My thermometer read 145 degrees Fahrenheit, just 20 feet into the cave system. I'd explored hundreds of caves, and they were always cooler than the surface temperature, especially in desert conditions. But I had 4 missing people to find, so I kept going deeper. The cave twisted downward, like a throat swallowing the earth. My headlamp beam reached about 30 feet ahead, showing rough rock walls that looked like they'd been carved by water millions of years ago. But water couldn't explain the claw marks I was seeing. They were gouged deep into solid granite parallel, grooves about 6 inches apart, running along the walls at different heights. Some were near the floor, others were up near the ceiling. Whatever made them was big, had claws like daggers, and could apparently crawl on walls. I tried to stay scientific about it. Mountain lions had claws, but they weren't that big. Bears could claw rock, but there were no bears in Death Valley. Maybe the missing climbers had used ice axes or climbing tools to mark their passage. But that didn't explain why some of the marks were 12 feet up the wall. 200 feet into the cave system, I found the first body. His name was Marcus Chen, according to the ID in his wallet. 26 years old, experienced climber from Los Angeles. He was lying on his back in a small chamber, arms spread wide, mouth open in what looked like surprise. But he wasn't injured. No cuts, no broken bones, no blood. He looked like he was sleeping, except for one thing that made my skin crawl. Was completely dried out. His skin was like leather. His lips were cracked and blackened. His eyes were sunken deep into his skull. He looked like a mummy, but his clothes were still damp with sweat. I'd seen dehydration deaths before. In the desert, it happened more often than people wanted to admit, but dehydration took days, sometimes weeks. Marcus had been missing for less than 2 days, and his body showed extreme desiccation that should have taken months in the driest conditions. I knelt beside him and checked for vital signs, knowing I wouldn't find any. His skin was hot to the touch, not just warm, but actually hot, like he had a severe fever. But dead bodies don't run fevers. My emergency radio crackled with static. When I tried to call it in, the cave walls were blocking the signal, which was normal. What wasn't normal was the way my equipment was behaving. My digital thermometer was flickering between readings 145, 160, 180 degrees, like it couldn't decide what temperature it was measuring. I took photographs of Marcus in the scene, then continued deeper into the cave. The claw marks were getting more frequent, and I started noticing something else. Symbols carved into the rock walls. They weren't random scratches. These were deliberate pictographs, the kind Native American tribes used to record important events or warnings. I recognized some of the Shoshone symbols from my cultural training warnings about dangerous animals, sacred places that should be avoided. One symbol kept repeating, a snake-like figure with legs surrounded by wavy lines that usually meant heat or fire. Underneath it was the Shoshone warning symbol for death. The cave branched into 3 passages ahead. The sulfur smell was strongest, coming from the left tunnel, along with that impossible heat. But something told me to check the right passage first. I found the second body there, Sarah Kim, 24, also from the Los Angeles climbing group. But her condition was even more disturbing than Marcus's. Her body had a crystalline quality, like she'd been turned to some kind of mineral while maintaining her human shape. Her skin looked like it was made of salt or quartz, translucent and gleaming in my headlamp beam. I'd never seen anything like it in 30 years of geology work. Human bodies didn't crystallize. They decomposed. They dried out. They turned to dust eventually, but they didn't become minerals. I reached out to touch her arm and immediately pulled my hand back. Her skin was burning hot and sharp as glass. When I looked closer, I could see that the crystallization went all the way through her internal organs were visible through her translucent skin. all of them transformed into the same crystal-like substance. My scientific mind was screaming that this was impossible. Bodies don't turn to crystal. Heat doesn't work this way. But the evidence was right in front of me, burning my fingertips and defying every natural law I knew. That's when I heard the sound. It came from deep in the cave system, a hissing noise like steam escaping from a pressure valve, but with a rhythm to it, almost like breathing. Long, slow breaths that echoed off the cave walls and seemed to come from everywhere at once. The temperature spiked. My thermometer hit 200 degrees and started flashing an error message. The air became so hot it hurt to breathe, like inhaling from an oven. Sweat poured down my face and evaporated before it could drip. Something was moving in the darkness beyond my headlamp beam. Something big. I heard the scraping of claws on rock, getting closer. The hissing breathing got louder, more excited. And then I saw the eyes. They glowed like molten gold in the darkness, about 6 feet off the ground, watching me with an intelligence that made my blood freeze despite the crushing heat. Not animal eyes, these had thought behind them. Calculation, hunger. I did what any sensible person would do. I ran. My boots slipped on the cave floor as I scrambled back toward the entrance. Behind me, I could hear movement, something large pursuing me through the tunnels, moving with impossible speed. The breathing sound turned into something that might have been laughter, deep and rumbling like an earthquake. I made it to the main passage and could see daylight ahead when my headlamp flickered and died. The batteries had melted from the heat, but I kept running toward that blessed square of sunlight, expecting any second to feel claws ripping into my back. I exploded out of the cave entrance and didn't stop running until I reached my truck. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the engine. Every shadow looked like it might hide golden eyes. Every sound made me think something was following me. I radioed base camp, 2 bodies found in cave system, requesting backup and coroner. Unusual circumstances, recommend extreme caution. What I didn't tell them was that I'd left 2 people dead in that cave, and something else very much alive. The backup team arrived 6 hours later. 2 rangers, a medical examiner, and a search and rescue specialist. I tried to warn them about the heat, the strange conditions, the thing I'd seen in the darkness. They listened politely and probably thought the desert sun had gotten to me. Dr. Williams, the medical examiner, looked at my photos of the crystallized body and frowned. Mineral deposits on the skin, he said, probably from the cave environment. We'll know more after we get them out. I wanted to argue, but how do you explain that a human body had turned to living crystal? How do you describe eyes that glowed like molten metal in complete darkness? You don't. You let them see for themselves. We went back into the cave as a team. I stayed close to the entrance while they went deeper to recover the bodies. The sulfur smell was stronger than before, and the temperature readings were off the charts. Dr. Williams's equipment started malfunctioning the moment we got 50 feet into the cave system. Elena was right about the heat. He called out, "I'm reading 180 degrees down here. That's not possible in a natural cave formation." They found Marcus first, still in the same position, but when they tried to move him, his body crumbled to dust. 36 hours earlier, he'd been a healthy young man. Now he was nothing but dried fragments that scattered when they touched him. Sarah's crystallized body was intact but impossible to move. Every time someone tried to lift her, the crystal structure cracked and threatened to shatter. They ended up photographing everything and covering her with a tarp. "We need a specialist team," Dr. Williams said. "This is beyond anything I've ever seen." That's when we found the 3rd climber. Tom Rodriguez was in a chamber deeper in the cave system, but he was still alive barely. He was conscious but couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only track us with his eyes as we approached. His body temperature was 106 degrees, but he wasn't sweating. His skin had the same leathery appearance as Marcus's, like all the moisture was being slowly drained from his cells. Dr. Williams tried to give him water, but Tom couldn't swallow. His throat had seized up completely. All he could do was stare at us with desperate, terrified eyes while something invisible slowly killed him. "We need to get him out of here now," Dr. Williams said. But when we tried to lift Tom, he screamed a sound like air being forced out of a balloon. His body was too fragile to move. The slightest touch caused his skin to crack like old leather. That's when I saw it again. Movement in the shadows beyond our lights. The thing from before, watching us work. This time I got a better look. It was roughly human-shaped but wrong in every detail. about 6 feet tall, standing upright but with a reptilian posture, head forward, back hunched, arms too long for its body. Its skin looked like burned rock, black and cracked, with ridges running along its spine that glowed dull red like cooling lava. But the worst part was its face. It had features that might once have been human to eyes, a nose, a mouth, but they were stretched and twisted into something alien. The eyes were pools of liquid gold that moved like mercury. The mouth was too wide, filled with teeth like broken glass. It was studying us the way a scientist studies lab rats. "Did you see that?" I whispered to the others. "See what?" Dr. Williams was focused on Tom, trying to figure out how to transport him safely. The creature stepped closer, into the edge of our light. This time I wasn't the only one who saw it. "Jesus Christ," one of the rangers gasped. "What is that thing?" The creature tilted its head, like it was curious about our reaction. Then it opened its mouth and made that hissing sound I'd heard before, but now I could tell it wasn't just breathing. It was talking. The hissing had patterns, rhythms, almost like words in a language made of steam and sulfur. And somehow, impossibly, I understood what it was saying. "Mine," it hissed. "My territory, my food." Tom Rodriguez died while we were staring at the creature. His last breath came out as a puff of superheated steam, and then his body collapsed inward like a deflated balloon. In seconds, he went from barely alive to completely desiccated doll. The remaining moisture in his body evaporated at once. The creature stepped forward and placed one clawed hand on Tom's remains. The body began to glow with the same dull red light as the creature's spine ridges. Energy flowed between them. Mike could actually see it, like heat waves made visible. "It's feeding," I whispered. "It's feeding on him." Dr. Williams was backing away slowly, his medical training warring with basic human terror. "That's not possible. Nothing can drain life energy. It's not scientifically." The creature looked at him and smiled. Its teeth were like molten glass, and when it opened its mouth wider, I could see fire burning in its throat. "Science," it hissed, and the word came out, wreathed in sulfur smoke. "I am older than your science." Then it moved. I'd never seen anything that big move so fast. 1 second it was crouched over Tom's body. The next it was on the cave ceiling, crawling toward us like a giant lizard. Its claws dug into solid granite, like it was soft clay. We ran, all 4 of us, trained professionals with decades of experience. Between us, ran like children fleeing a nightmare. The creature followed, not hurrying, just maintaining pace. It could have caught us easily, but it seemed to be enjoying the chase. Every few seconds, I'd look back and see those golden eyes, watching us, getting closer. We made it to the cave entrance, but the creature didn't follow us into the sunlight. It stopped just inside the cave mouth, hissing what might have been laughter. 4 came down. It called after us. 4 will stay. The 4th is still here somewhere. Jennifer Walsh, the 4th climber. We'd been so focused on the bodies we'd found, we'd forgotten about the one we hadn't. "We have to go back," I said. "She might still be alive." "Are you insane?" Dr. Williams's face was white with shock. "That thing will kill us all." But I was the senior ranger on scene. It was my responsibility to find her, no matter what was waiting in the darkness. "You 3 stay here." "Radio 4, back up. Back up. I'm going to find Jennifer." I went back into the cave alone, knowing I was probably going to die. The creature was waiting for me in the first chamber, sitting on a rock ledge like it had all the time in the world. Up close, in the beam of my backup flashlight, it looked even more wrong. Its skin wasn't just burned rock, it was covered in symbols, carved scars that glowed with internal heat, ancient markings that hurt to look at directly. "You came back," it said, and its voice was like gravel sliding down a mountain. "Brave, stupid, but brave. Where is she? Where's Jennifer?" The creature gestured deeper into the cave, with one impossible long arm. "Feeding chamber. She lives still, but not for long. The process must not be rushed." It stood up, and I realized it was even bigger than I'd thought, at least 7 feet tall when fully upright. The ridges along its spine pulsed brighter, and the temperature in the cave started climbing. "You interest me, little geologist. You study rocks, minerals, the bones of the earth. Do you know what I am?" I didn't answer, but it continued anyway. "I am what happens when the earth bleeds, when tectonic pressure and mineral fire and 10,000 years of heat create something that should not exist. I am geology given hunger." It started walking deeper into the cave, and I followed because I had no choice. Jennifer was down there somewhere, and I was her only chance. Your people, the first ones, knew me. They left warnings on the walls. Beware the heat devil, they said. Do not enter the burning caves when the sun stands highest. But their warnings were forgotten, and new people came. Climbers, hikers, explorers, food. The cave opened into a huge chamber I hadn't seen before. The walls were covered in symbols, not just Shoshone pictographs, but dozens of different languages and writing systems. Spanish, English, symbols I didn't recognize. All of them warnings, carved by people who'd encountered this thing and somehow survived to tell about it. In the center of the chamber was Jennifer Walsh. She was alive but paralyzed, lying on a flat rock like an altar. Her eyes were open and aware, tracking my movement as I entered. But she couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only breathe in short, desperate gasps. Around her were other bodies, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all in different stages of the same process I'd seen with the other climbers. Some were mummified like Marcus, others were crystallized like Sarah. A few were nothing but mineral sculptures that might once have been human. My collection, the creature said. Proudly, decades of feeding, the desert provides, but slowly I must be patient. I knelt beside Jennifer and checked her pulse. It was fast but weak, like her heart was working overtime to pump blood through veins that were slowly turning to crystal. How do I stop this? I asked the creature. What do you want? Want? It laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I want nothing. I am hunger itself. I am the price your kind pays for trespassing in places that were never meant for you. But there was something in its voice, some hesitation that made me think it wasn't telling the whole truth. I remembered the Shoshone pictographs, the warnings about sacred water. The symbols hadn't just been about avoiding the creature. They'd included protection rituals, ways to appease or drive off dangerous spirits. My emergency water bottle was nearly empty, but it was filled from the spring near the ranges. Spring the local tribes considered sacred. Long shot, but it was the only shot I had. I uncapped the bottle and splashed the remaining water on Jennifer's face and chest. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The creature screamed a sound, like superheated steam escaping under pressure. It staggered backward, claws scraping frantically at the cave walls. Where the water had touched Jennifer's skin, the crystallization process reversed. Color returned to her face, and she drew in a deep, shuddering breath. Sacred water, the creature hissed. How did you know? Lucky guess, I said, helping Jennifer sit up. She was weak but conscious, able to move with assistance. The creature was pacing now, agitated, its internal glow flickering like a dying flame. Old protections, old agreements. I cannot harm those blessed by the first people's waters. It was afraid. This ancient thing that had terrorized the desert was actually afraid of a half cup of spring water blessed by forgotten rituals. The agreement, I said, guessing. You can't hunt people who know the old ways. That's why you stay hidden, why you only take climbers and hikers who don't know the warnings. The creature's golden eyes narrowed. Clever, yes, the agreement holds, but only while the water protects you, and you have used it all. It was right. The bottle was empty, and Jennifer and I were still trapped in a cave with a monster that could drain the life from our bodies with a touch. But I had one more idea. I pulled the emergency flare gun from my belt, standard equipment for desert rescues. The creature tilted its head, curious about this new threat. Bright light, I said, heat and fire. Let's see how you like that. I fired the flare directly at the creature's face. The magnesium flame exploded in the confined space, turning the cave chamber into a miniature sun. The creature screamed again, but this time it sounded more angry than afraid. Fire cannot hurt what is made of fire, it snarled, advancing through the blazing light, but the flare had a different effect. The sudden temperature change, the blast of light in the darkness, it confused the creature's thermal senses. For just a moment, it was disoriented, stumbling like it couldn't see properly. That moment was enough. I grabbed Jennifer and ran for the cave entrance, half carrying her through the twisting passages. Behind us, the creature roared and gave chase, but the lingering effects of the sacred water and the flare disruption slowed it down just enough. We burst out of the cave into blazing desert sunlight. Jennifer collapsed the moment we cleared the entrance, her body finally giving in to exhaustion and trauma, but she was alive, breathing, human. The creature didn't follow us into the daylight. It stopped at the cave mouth, hissing threats and promises that it would find us again when the protections wore off. I didn't wait to hear its entire speech. I pulled out the emergency explosives from my pack, small charges designed to trigger rockfalls for emergency caverns, and placed them around the cave entrance. "This won't hold you forever," I called into the darkness, "but it'll slow you down." The explosions brought down half the canyon wall. Tons of rock sealed the cave entrance, trapping the creature inside. But even as the dust settled, I could hear it moving underneath, already starting to dig its way out. Jennifer and I made it back to the rescue team, but barely. She was hospitalized for severe dehydration and exposure. The official report listed the other 3 climbers as victims of extreme desert conditions and cave-in. No mention of creatures or supernatural forces, but I knew the truth, and I knew the cave-in was only a temporary solution. That was 30 years ago. Jennifer recovered completely and moved to Oregon, as far from the desert as she could get. We stayed in touch for a few years, but neither of us liked talking about what happened in Devil's Canyon. I transferred to Olympic National Park in Washington, the wettest, coolest climate I could find. Even now, I can't stand temperatures above 80 degrees. My colleagues think I have some kind of medical condition, but it's simpler than that. I know what lives in the heat. The official investigation concluded that the missing climbers died from dehydration and mineral exposure in an unstable cave system. Case closed. But I kept getting calls from mysterious government agencies, offering research positions, studying unusual geological phenomena in exchange for my discretion about what really happened. I took one of those jobs eventually. Turns out there are more things in the desert than most people know about, and someone has to keep track of them. Over the years, I've documented similar incidents throughout the American Southwest. Cave systems with impossible thermal readings, missing persons reports that follow certain patterns, mineral formations that shouldn't exist in nature, always in remote desert areas, always involving extreme heat, always leaving behind evidence. That makes no scientific sense. I work with tribal councils now, helping to establish protection protocols around certain cave systems. The Shoshone elders remember the old stories, the old warnings. They teach me about sacred waters and protective rituals, knowledge that might save lives when the rational world fails. Most people think we're just being extra careful about geological hazards. They don't need to know about heat devils and creatures that feed on human life force. They just need to stay away from certain caves, especially during the hottest days of summer. But sometimes the protections fail. Sometimes someone ignores the warnings or doesn't get the message in time. Last year, thermal sensors detected massive heat spikes at 3 different locations in Death Valley. Cave systems I'd been monitoring for decades suddenly showed activity levels that shouldn't be possible. Something was moving underground, something that had been dormant for years. The creature from Devil's Canyon wasn't the only one. It never had been. I'm retiring next month, but I've trained a new generation of rangers in what I call extreme thermal hazard protocols. They think they're learning about dangerous cave conditions and emergency heat exposure procedures. The smart ones figure out there's more to it eventually. Those are the ones who get the full briefing, the ones who learn about sacred waters and protective rituals, the ones who understand that some hungers burn hotter than the sun. 2 weeks ago, seismic monitors detected unusual activity near Devil's Canyon. The rockfall I triggered 30 years ago is finally giving way. Something is digging up through 30 feet of stone and debris, working its way back to the surface. I know what it is. I know what it wants. And I know that when it breaks free, someone will have to be waiting with sacred water and the old protections. Someone who believes in impossible things and understands that the desert keeps its own counsel. The heat devil is waking up, and summer is coming to Death Valley. God help us all. The radio crackled to life at 6:47 a.m., pulling me from my first decent sleep in weeks. Base, this is Morrison. Ski group, 48 hours overdue. Last contact mentioned. Someone following them. Kit Morrison responding. I set down my coffee and stared. At the radio, that was my voice, but I didn't remember making that call. The timestamp showed yesterday morning. I'd been searching for that ski group for 2 days now, and my mind was starting to play tricks on me. My name is Catherine Morrison, but everyone calls me Kit. I'm 29, and I've been a ranger here at Glacier National Park for 3 years. Before that, I was an EMT in Billings. I earned my spot here the hard way. Being one of the first women rangers meant proving myself twice as hard as the men. My wall is covered with certifications: Advanced Wilderness Life Support, Avalanche Level 3 Instructor, Winter Rescue Specialist, 23 successful rescues and counting. I've never lost anyone on my watch until now. Maybe. The ski group was supposed to be back Tuesday. 4 college kids from Seattle, experienced enough but not Montana winter experienced. They'd planned a 3-day backcountry trip to Blackstone Peak, following the old mining trail that winds through the high country. Good weather, good equipment, good route planning. Everything looked perfect. But Tuesday came and went. Wednesday too. Now it was Thursday morning, and the storm that had been threatening all week was finally moving in. The weather service was calling for a blizzard. Temperatures dropping to 30 below. Winds up to 60 miles per hour. Zero visibility. If those kids were still alive up there, this storm would kill them. I grabbed my gear from the rack by the door. Winter rescue pack, emergency shelter, extra food, medical supplies. My snowshoes were already strapped to my backpack. The snowmobile was gassed up and ready. I had maybe 6 hours before the storm hit full force. Wendigo stories, I muttered to myself, remembering what old Joe Crowfeather had told me last month. Blackfoot campfire tales to keep children from wandering. Cannibalism myths. Joe was a tribal elder who sometimes helped with search and rescue. He'd pulled me aside after a training session, his weathered face serious. That area around Blackstone Peak, he'd said. Our people have stories, old stories, about the hunger that walks in winter. I'd nodded politely and filed it away with all the other local folklore. Every mountain range has its monsters. Bigfoot, mountain lions that walk upright, spirits that lead travelers astray. Part of being a ranger is knowing when to listen to local wisdom and when to focus on facts. Facts were what I needed now, for missing skiers. Incoming storm. Time. Running out, the snowmobile roared to life, and I headed up the mountain trail. The morning air was crisp and still, but I could smell the storm coming, that metallic scent that meant heavy snow. My breath came out in white puffs as I climbed higher, following the packed trail that led toward the mining camps. Blackstone Peak got its name from the old copper mine that operated up there in the 1880s. The mine played out quick, but the trails remained. It was good skiing country in winter, if you knew what you were doing. The college kids had filed a proper backcountry permit, marked their route on the map, given a reasonable timeline. They seemed to know what they were doing. So where were they? The trail began to climb more steeply, winding through stands of pine and aspen. I kept my eyes open for any sign of the group ski tracks, abandoned gear, anything. The snow was deep but not impossible. Perfect powder for skiing. Actually, the kind of conditions that made you want to stay out longer than planned. Maybe that's all this was. Maybe they'd found some perfect hidden valley and decided to extend their trip. Maybe their radio had died, or they'd forgotten to check in. Maybe I'd find them safe and sound, embarrassed about causing trouble. But the voice on the radio this morning, my own voice, had mentioned someone following them. I didn't remember saying that. I didn't remember making that call at all. The snowmobile's engine echoed off the mountain walls as I climbed higher. Behind me, the sky was darkening fast. I found their tracks 2 hours up the trail. The ski marks were clear in the snow for sets heading up toward the mining camp. But something was wrong. About 100 yards before the camp, the tracks just stopped. Not gradually, like they'd taken off their skis to walk. The parallel lines ended abruptly, as if all 4 skiers had simply vanished mid-stride. I stopped the snowmobile and got out to look closer. The tracks were definitely theirs. I could see the different ski patterns, the varying depths that showed different weights and skiing styles. But they ended at the same spot, all 4 at once. There were no signs of a struggle, no other tracks leading away. Just empty snow beyond that point. I looked up toward the mining camp. The old cabin was maybe 50 yards ahead, barely visible. Through the trees, if they'd made it that far, they would have left some trace. The wind was picking up, and the first flakes of snow were starting to fall. I had to move fast. I put my snowshoes on and followed the ski tracks on foot, looking for any clue I might have missed from the snowmobile. The snow was about 3 feet deep, perfect for skiing but hard to walk through even with snowshoes. The tracks were clean and straight, no sign of panic or hurry, until they stopped. I knelt down and studied the end of the tracks more carefully. The snow was disturbed here, but not in a way that made sense. It looked like ... like the skiers had been picked up. lifted straight up out of their tracks, but that was impossible. A gust of wind hit me, carrying a strange smell, sweet and sick, like meat that had gone bad. I stood up and looked around, but I couldn't see where it was coming from. The mining camp was just ahead. Time to check the cabin. The old structure was still solid after all these years. Logs chinked with mud and moss, a stone chimney, windows that had been boarded up decades ago. The door was hanging open. That was wrong. The door should have been closed, even if it didn't latch properly. In this kind of cold, even experienced campers would never leave a door open. I approached carefully, my hand on the bear spray attached to my belt. The smell was stronger here, that sweet sick odor that made my stomach turn. "Hello," I called. "Out. Anyone in there?" No answer. I stepped inside and immediately saw the mess. The cabin had been tossed like someone had been searching for something. Sleeping bags scattered, backpacks opened and emptied, camp stoves and cookware thrown around. But it wasn't random destruction. There was a pattern to it, like someone had been looking for food. I found their gear. 4 backpacks, 4 sets of skis propped against the wall, extra clothes hanging from the rafters. Everything was here except the people, and except their food. Every food container had been opened and emptied, not just eaten, demolished. Cans had been torn open with what looked like claws. Plastic containers were shredded. Even the emergency rations had been consumed, wrapper and all in some cases. But the worst thing was the smell. Now that I was inside, I could tell it was coming from the fireplace. I walked over and looked inside. Bones. Scattered around the cold ashes were bones that had been gnawed clean. Small bones, rabbit, maybe, or squirrel. But they'd been cracked open, the marrow sucked out, and the tooth marks on them. I'd seen animal predation before. Bears, mountain lions, wolves. This was different. These tooth marks were human-sized, but wrong somehow. Too sharp, too deep. I took pictures with my camera, then looked around the rest of the cabin. In the corner, I found a small notebook. I opened it and saw neat handwriting in blue ink. Asterisk, day 1. Made it to the cabin, no problem. Weather's perfect. Snow's great. Planning to hit the back bowls tomorrow. Sarah, day 2. Found some awesome runs on the north face. Mike's being weird about the food. Keeps checking our supplies like he thinks someone's going to steal them. Otherwise, great day. Sarah, day 3. Food's running low. We brought enough for 5 days, but somehow we're almost out. Mike says he's not eating it, but someone is. Johnson keeps staring at the rest of us during meals. Makes me uncomfortable. Sarah, day 4. This is Sarah. I'm scared. Johnson killed a rabbit with his bare hands this morning. Ate it raw. Said the cooked food wasn't enough anymore. He keeps talking about being hungry, but he's eating more than the rest of us combined. Mike and Jenny want to leave, but Johnson won't let us. Says he's not done eating yet. Day 5. Johnson's changing. He's taller than he was, and thinner. His fingernails have grown long and sharp. He doesn't talk much anymore, just whispers about being hungry. Always hungry. He's looking at us like we're food. Day 6. Jenny's gone. We woke up and she was gone. Johnson was sitting by the fire, smiling. There was blood on his hands. He said she went to get more food, but she would be back soon. Mike tried to leave, but Johnson stopped him. Broke his arm. We're trapped here with him. Asterisk, the notebook ended there. I flipped through the rest of the pages, but they were blank. I stood up quickly, my heart pounding. This was wrong. This was very wrong. I needed to get out of here and call for backup. I stepped outside and reached for my radio. Static. I tried my cell phone. No signal. The storm was interfering with everything. That's when I heard it. A voice calling from the woods. Help, ... please, ... It was coming from the north, toward the old mine shaft. A woman's voice, weak and scared. I'm coming, I shouted. Back, I grabbed my medical kit and headed toward the sound. The snow was falling harder now, making it difficult to see. I followed the voice, calling out to let whoever it was know I was coming. The voice led me about 200 yards from the cabin to a small clearing near the mine entrance. That's where I found her. She was lying in the snow, partially buried. A young woman, maybe 20 years old, wearing a bright blue ski jacket. She was alive but barely conscious, her skin pale with cold and shock. Hey, I'm here, I said, kneeling beside her. I'm a ranger. You're going to be okay. She opened her eyes and looked at me. Johnson, she whispered. He's still out there, still hungry. I started checking her for injuries. She was hypothermic, dehydrated, but alive. No obvious broken bones, but there was something wrong with her left leg. When I rolled up her pant leg, I saw the bite marks, human bite marks. Recent ones. We need to get you out of here, I said, pulling out my emergency blanket. Can you walk? She shook her head. He's coming back. He said he'd be back when he gets hungry again. I wrapped her in the blanket and activated a chemical heat pack. The storm was getting worse. I could barely see the cabin from here. Who else is with you? I asked. Where are Mike and Sarah? Her eyes filled with tears. Gone. Johnson. ... He was so hungry. Always so hungry. He ate them. That's when I heard the sound. A low whistle, like wind through trees. But there was no wind. It was coming from the direction of the mine shaft. The woman grabbed my arm with surprising strength. He's coming, she whispered. He smells you. I looked toward the mine and saw something moving in the shadows. Something tall and thin, walking with an odd, jerky gait. Can you move? I asked urgently. She nodded, and I helped her to her feet. We started back toward the cabin, but the thing in the shadows was moving faster than we were. It stepped into the clearing, and I got my first good look at it. It had been human once. I could see that much, but it was wrong now. Too tall, maybe 8 feet. Too thin, like it had been stretched. Its face was gaunt, the skin pulled tight over sharp cheekbones. Its eyes were yellow and hungry. But worst of all, I recognized it. The face was familiar from the missing persons photos. Johnson, one of the missing skiers. He smiled at us, showing teeth that had been filed 2 points. More food, he said, in a voice like wind through dead leaves. Still so hungry. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the woman under her arms and started half carrying, half dragging her toward the cabin. Behind us, Johnson, or the thing that had been Johnson, let out that whistling sound again, but louder now. Hungry. The cabin, I gasped, struggling through the deep snow. Get to the cabin. The woman, Jenny, I realized, from the notebook, was trying to help, but her injured leg made it difficult. We stumbled through the snow, the storm getting worse with every step. I could hear Johnson behind us, but he wasn't running. He was taking his time, like he knew we couldn't escape. The sound of his feet in the snow was wrong too light for something that big, like he barely weighed anything at all. We made it. To the cabin door. I shoved Jenny inside and slammed the door behind us, throwing the old iron latch. It wouldn't hold for long, but it was something. What is he? I asked, breathing hard. Jenny was shaking, and not just from the cold. We were starving, she said. The food ran out on day 3, but Johnson kept eating. He said he found a cache of supplies in the mine, but when we asked to see it, he got angry, started acting strange. Outside, something scraped against the cabin wall. Long, slow scratches like fingernails on wood. He got taller, Jenny continued, thinner. His teeth grew sharp. He said the hunger was inside him now, and it would never stop. He said he needed to feed it. The scratching stopped. The cabin was silent, except for the wind. Where are Mike and Sarah? I whispered. Jenny's face crumpled. The mine, he took them there, said it was his pantry now. I looked around the cabin. There had to be a way out of this. My radio was dead. My phone had no signal, and the storm was getting worse by the minute. But I had emergency supplies, and I knew these mountains better than most people. Is there another way out of here? I asked. Jenny shook her head. Just the door. And the window. But it's boarded up. The window. I'd forgotten about the window. It was boarded up from the outside, but if I could get the boards off. That's when the whistling started again. It was coming from above us now. He's on the roof, Jenny whispered. I looked up at the ceiling. The old logs were solid, but Johnson was bigger now, stronger, and he sounded like he was looking for a way in. I grabbed my pack and started pulling out supplies. Emergency flares, rope, my avalanche beacon. There had to be something I could use. The whistling stopped. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then the chimney started to shake. He's coming. Down the chimney, I said, backing away from the fireplace. Soot and debris started falling from above. I could hear Johnson working his way down, his claws scraping against the stone walls. I grabbed Jenny's hand. We're going out the window. I ran to the boarded window and started pulling at the boards with my hands. They were nailed tight, but some of them were old, and the wood was starting to rot. I managed to get one board loose, then another. Behind us, Johnson dropped down into the fireplace with a wet thud. I turned around and saw him crouched there, covered in soot, his yellow eyes glowing in the dim light. He was bigger than he'd been outside. maybe 9 feet tall now. His limbs stretched and twisted. His fingers ended in claws that looked like they could tear through metal. "Hungry," he said, and his voice was like wind through a graveyard, so very hungry. I ripped another board off the window. The opening was almost big enough for us to squeeze through. Johnson stood up slowly, his head nearly touching the ceiling. "You smell like fear," he said. "Fear makes the meat taste better." I grabbed Jenny and shoved her toward the window. "Go, now." She squeezed through the opening and dropped into the snow outside. I was right behind her, but as I started to climb through, Johnson grabbed my leg. His claws went right through my pants and into my flesh. I screamed and kicked at him with my free leg, but he held on. He was pulling me back into the cabin. "Let go," I yelled, grabbing onto the window frame. Johnson's face appeared in the window opening, his sharp teeth gleaming. "I've been so hungry," he said, "for so long." I managed to get my bear spray out of my belt and sprayed it directly in his face. He screamed and let go of my leg, stumbling backward. I fell through the window and landed hard in the snow. "Run," I shouted to Jenny. We ran into the woods, Johnson's screams echoing behind us. The storm was a full blizzard now, the snow so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. But I knew these mountains, and I knew there were other shelters. The old mine had several entrances. If we could get to one of the side tunnels, we might be able to hide until the storm passed. "This way," I said, leading Jenny through the trees. Behind us, Johnson burst out of the cabin. He was moving faster now, crashing through the snow like it wasn't there, and he was making that whistling sound again. But it was different now, angry. We reached the mine entrance, not the main shaft, but one of the smaller tunnels that branched off from the main operation. The opening was partially collapsed, but there was enough room to squeeze through. "In here," I said. Jenny hesitated. "What if he follows us? Then we'll be trapped," I said. "But out here, we're already dead." We crawled through the opening into the mine tunnel. It was dark and cold, but it was dry. I pulled out my flashlight and looked around. The tunnel went back about 50 feet before opening into a larger chamber. The walls were rough stone, carved out by hand over a century ago. There were old mining tools scattered around, and the remains of wooden support beams. "Stay here," I told Jenny. "I'm going to check the chamber." I walked deeper into the mine, my flashlight beam dancing off the walls. The chamber was bigger than I'd expected, maybe 20 feet across, and it wasn't empty. There were bones everywhere, human bones, dozens of them, scattered across the floor like someone had been collecting them. Some were old, yellowed with age. Others were recent, still had bits of flesh on them, and in the center of the chamber, arranged in a neat pile, were backpacks, hiking gear, ski equipment. Some of it looked like it had been there for years. This wasn't Johnson's first time. He'd been hunting in these mountains for a long time. I heard Jenny scream behind me. I spun around and ran back toward the tunnel entrance. Johnson was there, his impossibly long arm reaching through the opening. He had Jenny by the ankle and was pulling her toward him. "No," I shouted, grabbing her hands. We played tug-of-war with Jenny's body, but Johnson was stronger, much stronger. He pulled her through the opening like she weighed nothing. Her screams echoed through the mine, then suddenly stopped. I waited in the dark, my heart pounding. The only sound was the wind outside and the distant drip of water somewhere in the mine. Then I heard Johnson's voice, coming from the tunnel. "Entrance. Come out, little ranger," he said. "I know you're in there. I can smell you." I turned off my flashlight and pressed myself against the wall of the chamber. In the darkness, I could hear him moving around outside the tunnel. "I've been so hungry for so long," he said. "Do you know what it's like to be hungry all the time? To never be satisfied no matter how much you eat?" His voice was getting closer. He was crawling into the tunnel. "I remember being human," he continued. "I remember when food used to satisfy me. But that was before the hunger took me, before I learned what real eating was." I could see the faint glow of his yellow eyes in the tunnel now. He was coming for me. "The others tasted good," he said. "But I'm still hungry. I'm always hungry now. And you're going to help me with that." I had to do something. I couldn't just hide in here and wait for him to find me. I thought about what old Joe Crowfeather had told me about the Wendigo stories, about the hunger that walks in winter. In the stories, there was always a way to fight back. There had to be. Sacred tobacco. That was what Joe had mentioned. The Blackfoot used tobacco in their ceremonies to ward off evil spirits. I didn't have tobacco, but I had something else. I reached into my pack and pulled out an emergency flare. Johnson's face appeared at the entrance to the chamber, his features twisted and inhuman. "There you are," he said, smiling with his pointed teeth. I pulled the tab on the flare. It burst into brilliant red light, filling the chamber with fire and smoke. Johnson screamed and stumbled backward, covering his eyes with his claws. The light seemed to hurt him, or maybe it was the smoke. I ran toward the tunnel entrance, but Johnson was blocking the way. He swiped at me with his claws, but he was blind from the flare and missed. I ducked under his arm and scrambled through the tunnel opening. Behind me, I could hear him crashing around in the chamber, still screaming. I made it outside and kept running. The storm was at its worst now, but I didn't care. I had to get away from the mine, away from Johnson. I ran through the woods, using the flare to light my way. Behind me, Johnson's screams echoed through the mountains, but I knew he'd follow. He was still hungry. I ran through the blizzard for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The flare gave me enough light to see where I was going, but it also made me a target. Johnson would be able to follow the red glow through the snow. I had to find shelter, real shelter, not just another hiding place. The old ranger station. There was an abandoned fire lookout about a mile north of the mine, built on a rocky outcrop that would be hard for Johnson to reach. If I could make it there, I might have a chance. I stumbled through the deep snow, my wounded leg bleeding and slowing me down. The flare was burning low, and I only had 2 more in my pack. After that, I'd be alone in the dark with whatever Johnson had become. The wind was howling now, and the snow was so thick I could barely see my own hands. But I kept moving, using my compass and my knowledge of the terrain to guide me. That's when I found the cave. It was set into the side of a cliff, the opening, mostly hidden by snow and ice. I almost walked past it, but something made me stop. There was a warmth coming from inside, like a fire was burning somewhere in the depths. I hesitated. Caves could be dangerous, especially in winter. But with the storm getting worse and Johnson hunting me, I didn't have much choice. I squeezed through the opening and found myself in a narrow passage that led deeper into the mountain. The walls were covered with strange markings, symbols carved into the stone that looked very old. I followed the passage for about 50 feet before it opened into a larger chamber. The warmth was stronger here, and I could see why. The walls were covered with paintings. Not just any paintings. These were pictographs, done in the old style with natural pigments. They showed scenes of hunting, of ceremonies, of daily life. But there were other images too, darker ones. Tall, thin figures with claws and sharp teeth. Humans running in terror. Scenes of feeding, of consumption. And at the center of it all, a figure that looked exactly like Johnson, the Wendigo. I'd heard the stories from Joe Crowfeather, but seeing them painted on the walls made them real. This cave was ancient, used by the Blackfoot for generations as a place of warning, a place to remember the danger that lived in these mountains. I walked closer to the paintings and saw that they weren't just historical records. They were instructions, warnings about how to recognize the Wendigo, how to avoid it, how to fight it. And in the center of the chamber, carved into the stone floor, was a circle of symbols, protection symbols. I realized this was a sacred place, a sanctuary. I stepped into the circle and immediately felt different, calmer, stronger. The fear that had been clawing at my chest since I'd found the cabin began to fade. That's when I heard the voice. "You have come seeking the old wisdom." I spun around and saw an old man sitting cross-legged at the far end of the chamber. He was dressed in traditional Blackfoot clothing, his long grey hair braided with feathers and beads. "Joe," I said, recognizing the tribal elder who'd warned me about the mountain. He smiled. "I've been waiting for you, Kit Morrison, waiting for someone to come who could understand. How did you get here?" The storm is just weather," Joe said. "But what hunts you is older than weather, older than these mountains." I looked around the chamber. "This place has been here for 1,000 years, Joe finished. "My people have always known about the hunger that walks in winter. We built this place to fight it." "Johnson," I said, "he's not human anymore." Joe nodded. "The Wendigo takes those who give in to the hunger, who choose to feed on human flesh. It transforms them, makes them into something that can never be satisfied." "How do I stop him?" Joe stood up and walked to the painted walls. "You don't stop him, you contain him, trap him, make sure he can never feed again." He pointed to one of the paintings. It showed a Wendigo trapped in a cave, surrounded by fire and smoke. Sacred tobacco, Joe said. It burns the spirit, forces the Wendigo to retreat to its place of transformation. The mine, I said. Yes, but you must be careful. The Wendigo is strongest in the place where it was born, where it first tasted human flesh. I heard a sound from the cave entrance, a low whistling that I recognized. He's found us, I said. Joe reached into his medicine bag and pulled out a small pouch. Sacred tobacco, he said, handing it to me. Light it when you face him. But remember, the Wendigo was human once. There may still be something of Johnson left inside. The whistling was getting closer. Johnson was in the cave, following the passage toward the chamber. What about you? I asked Joe. He smiled. I'll be fine. This is sacred ground. The Wendigo cannot enter the circle. Johnson's voice echoed from the passage. I smell you, little ranger. I smell your fear. It makes me so hungry. I looked at the tobacco pouch in my hand. It was a small thing to bet my life on, but it was all I had. Go, Joe said. Face him. But remember, he's not your enemy. The hunger is. I nodded, and stepped out of the circle. Immediately, I felt the fear come rushing back, but I pushed it down. I had a job to do. I walked toward the passage entrance. Johnson was almost there, his yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. There you are, he said, his voice like wind through dead leaves. I've been looking everywhere for you. He stepped into the chamber, and I got my first good look at him in the firelight. He was even bigger than before, maybe 10 feet tall now. His limbs were stretched and twisted, his fingers ending in claws that looked like they could tear through stone. But his face was still recognizably human, still recognizably Johnson. You're hungry, I said, staying calm. He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Hungry? I'm starving. I'm always starving. Do you know what that's like? To be so hungry that you can't think of anything else. I can help you, I said. He took a step closer. Yes, you can. You can feed me. I pulled out the tobacco pouch and opened it. This isn't what you really want, isn't it? He said, his claws reaching for me. I lit the tobacco with my lighter. It caught fire immediately, filling the chamber with sweet-smelling smoke. Johnson screamed and stumbled backward, covering his face with his claws. What is that? Make it stop. It's sacred tobacco, I said, stepping closer to him. It burns. Away, the hunger, it can set you free. No, he screamed. I need the hunger. Without it, I'm nothing. But I could see the change in him. The smoke was working. He was getting smaller, his claws retracting, his face becoming more human. Johnson, I said, you're still in there. You can fight this. He looked at me with eyes that were no longer yellow. Kit, is that you? It's me, I said. You're going to be okay. But even as I said it, I could see the hunger returning. The smoke was fading, and with it, the protection it offered. I can't stop it, Johnson said, his voice human again but filled with despair. The hunger is too strong. It's been too long. His claws began to grow again, his body stretching back to its monstrous proportions. You have to kill me, he said, before I lose control again, please. I looked at the tobacco in my hand. There was still some left, but not much, and once it was gone, I'd be defenseless against him. There has to be another way, I said. There is, Joe said from behind me, but it requires a sacrifice. I turned around. Joe was standing at the edge of the circle, his eyes sad but determined. The Wendigo must return to its place of birth, he said, to the mine. If you can trap it there with the sacred smoke, it will be contained, but someone must stay to keep it trapped. No, I said. There has to be another way. Johnson was changing again, becoming more monster than man. Do it, he said. Trap me. I can't fight it much longer. I looked at the tobacco in my hand, then at Johnson, then at Joe. I'll do it, I said. I'll trap him. Joe shook his head. You have a life to live, Kit Morrison. A purpose beyond this mountain. So do you, he smiled. My purpose is here. It always has been. My people have been guarding this place for generations. It's time I took my turn. Johnson let out a roar that shook the cave walls. He was fully transformed again, his human consciousness buried under the hunger. Go, Joe said. Lead him to the mine, I'll follow. I lit the last of the tobacco and held it up. Johnson hissed and backed away from the smoke. Come on, I said to him. Let's go home. I led Johnson through the storm to the mine, the burning tobacco keeping him at bay but not stopping him completely. He followed me like a wild animal, staying just out of reach of the smoke, his yellow eyes fixed on me with terrible hunger. The main mine shaft was dark and cold, but I could feel the weight of history in the air. This was where it had started, where Johnson had first given in to the hunger, where he'd tasted human flesh and become something else. Joe appeared at the mine entrance, carrying a larger bundle of sacred tobacco. In the deepest chamber, he said, where the bones are, that's where we make our stand. I led the way deeper into the mine, the tobacco smoke creating a protective barrier around us. Johnson followed, but he was getting more agitated, more desperate. He knew what we were planning. The bone chamber was exactly as I'd left it. Scattered remains of decades of victims, collected by the thing that had once been human. This was the Wendigo's lair, its feeding ground. Here, Joe said, beginning to arrange the tobacco in a circle around the chamber. This will hold him. I watched as he worked, creating a barrier of sacred smoke that would trap Johnson in the chamber. But I knew what it meant. Someone would have to stay to maintain the barrier. Joe, I said, let me do this. You have family, people who care about you. He looked at me with kind eyes. And you have work to do, Kit Morrison. People to save, mountains to protect. This is my work. Johnson burst into the chamber, his claws scraping against the stone walls. He was fully transformed now, 10 feet of hunger and rage and desperation. Light it, Joe said, handing me a torch. I lit the tobacco circle. It flared to life, creating a wall of smoke that Johnson couldn't cross. He threw himself against it, screaming, but the sacred smoke held him back. It's done, Joe said. He's trapped. I looked at the old man. How long will it last? As long as someone maintains it, he said. As long as someone remembers why it's necessary. Joe, ... double quotes, he smiled. This is what I was meant to do, Kit. My grandfather did it before me, and his grandfather before him. We've been keeping the hunger contained for generations. Johnson's screams echoed through the chamber, but they were getting weaker. The sacred smoke was working, forcing him back into the deepest part of the mine. Go, Joe said. Get out of here before the storm gets worse. I hesitated at the chamber entrance. What about you? I'll be fine. This is sacred work, honored work. I took one last look at Johnson, huddled in the corner of the chamber like a wounded animal. For just a moment, his eyes met mine, and I saw something human there. Something grateful. Thank you, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. Then the hunger took him again, and he was lost. I made my way out of the mine as the storm began to fade. The rescue helicopter found me 3 hours later, hypothermic and barely conscious, stumbling through the snow near the ranger station. The official report said that 4 college students had died of exposure and wildlife predation. The mine was sealed as geologically unstable after a localized seismic event caused several tunnel collapses. Joe Crowfeather was listed as missing, presumed dead in the storm. His body was never found. I was offered a promotion and a transfer to a warmer climate. I took the transfer, Death Valley, where it never snows and the sun shines 350 days a year. I kept the promotion quiet, but I took it. Someone had to carry on the work. The official files don't mention the Wendigo, of course. They don't mention the bones in the mine or the sacred tobacco or the ancient cave paintings. But there are other files, unofficial ones, kept by people who know what really lives in the mountains. I've investigated 17 similar cases over the past 20 years. Missing hikers, unexplained disappearances, stories of cannibalism and transformation. Most of them are just stories, but some of them ... some of them are real. I keep a pouch of sacred tobacco in my desk drawer now. Joe's grandson, Robert Crowfeather, makes sure I always have a fresh supply. He understands the importance of the work, even if he's never seen what I've seen. The mine is still sealed. I go back every few years to check on it, to make sure the barriers are holding. The entrance is overgrown now, hidden by 20 years of mountain vegetation. But sometimes, on quiet winter nights when the wind is just right, you can still hear something moving around down there. Something hungry. I train selected rangers now, teaching them what to look for. I call it cultural sensitivity training in the official reports, but the rangers who understand know what it really is. Most of them think I'm just a paranoid old woman who's been in the mountains too long. But some of them listen. Some of them learn, and when the reports come in, missing hikers, strange tracks in the snow, stories of something following travelers through the winter woods, some of them know what to do. They call me Last winter, there was an incident near Mount Rainier. A family of campers found dead, partially consumed, their campsite destroyed. The local authorities blamed bears, but the bite marks were wrong. The consumption pattern was wrong. I drove up there myself, carrying my emergency pack and a large supply of sacred tobacco. I found the cave, saw the paintings, identified the feeding ground. But this time, I wasn't alone. 3 other rangers came with me, people I'd trained, people who understood. We contained the threat, sealed the cave, made sure it couldn't spread. The hunger never dies. It waits in the mountains, patient as stone, looking for people who are desperate enough, hungry enough, to make the choice that Johnson made. And when it finds them, it transforms them into something that can never be satisfied. But it can be contained, it can be watched, it can be stopped. That's my job now. That's what I do. I'm 63 years old, and I've been keeping the hungry things in their caves for half my life. When I retire, someone else will take over. Robert Crow. Feather's daughter is studying to be a park ranger. She knows the old stories, understands the importance of the work. The cycle continues. Last month, I got a call from a ranger in Yellowstone. Ski group overdue. Strange tracks in the snow. Reports of someone following campers. The temperature was dropping and a storm was moving in. I packed my gear and drove north. The hunger was calling again, and someone had to answer. Someone always has to answer. In my final report, filed away in a locked cabinet that only a few people can access, I wrote, "The hunger never dies. It waits in the mountains, patient as stone. Our job isn't to fight it, it's to never let it feed." But sometimes, on quiet winter nights, when the wind howls through the peaks, I think about Joe Crowfeather, still down there in the mine, still keeping watch, still making sure that Johnson's hunger never escapes into the world. And I wonder how many other guardians are out there, sitting in dark places, keeping ancient hungers contained, keeping the rest of us safe from the things that should never be fed. The mountains are full of secrets. Most of them should stay buried, but someone has to know where they're buried. Someone has to keep watch. That someone is me. And when I'm gone, it will be someone else. The watch never ends. The hunger never dies. And the mountains remember everything.